Okay. Oh, hi. Hello. Ooh, I might have forgotten to do the thing where I flip it so you can, yeah. Well, YouTube can see what the covers look like, but Facebook, I forgot to do the flippy do where you make everything sideways, back to front, but in a horizontal way. Hi. I think I clearly need some tea. Is anybody watching? That is the question. Drop a comment in if you're there so I can say hello. Let me know where you might be tuning in from. I know it looks like I'm having an adult beverage, but this is in fact simply some passion fruit green tea. So I swear I'm just caffeinating. Hello to Seattle and Arizona. Well, this is exciting. We have some people. Houston, hooray. Oh, good. Hi, everybody. It is a lovely, beautiful day here in Northern California. And it feels like it's finally fall, which is always a thrill. My favorite season. I hate to be mundane about it, but I do love the autumn. I'm dressed in an autumnal manner to celebrate. This is a vintage piece from the late 50s, I think. And it's a little tight, but I still wear it. So Ty, my goodness. DC. Wow. Okay. All over the place. Hard to find the link, was it, Kimberly? Facebook? Really? I think Facebook does not want lives to happen anymore. Good evening. Hello, Wales. How exciting. North Wales. Wonderful. Good evening. Olympia. Wonderful. Ooh, birthday month. Love that. Wish I was a fall birthday. I'm spring, baby, but that's the way it goes for some of us. Hi everyone. Yay. So I thought, I mean, I'm doing this thing where I'm trying to sort of theme the lives so we have some sort of topic we can stick to. But as per usual, we don't have to stick to any of these topics. While people are finding the link, if they can, and tuning in on YouTube, if they can, I am going to run through the rigmaroles, which I very carefully prepared and are posted for Facebook, but YouTube didn't allow me to put them in. So I'll put them in after for YouTube. But essentially it's the usual things people ask me after a live, which is as follows. This is an old one from the Zon, so I don't think you can get it anymore. It's velvet. It's quite warm, um, since the reason it doesn't come out of retirement very often. But I do love it. Obviously, it is one of my reds. These reds are not my reds. This is my red. As is the lipstick. The lipstick is my old favorite. It's MAC. It's Ruby Woo. Just their matte satin formula. Great lipstick, expensive. Am looking for a good dupe, but hard to beat, especially when I have a day like today where I had something at 8 o'clock this morning, essentially to be ready for, and so I've sort of been in makeup and lipstick all day. I kind of, if I'm not gonna wear like a color stay like I do at an event, then I usually reach for Ruby Woo because it has a really good staying power for just a standard bullet. The tea I am drinking is this passion fruit green tea. When I drink iced tea, like to ice my greens and my oolongs, and I know that makes me a very strange bee. I think it is because the first like cold tea I really learned to love was bubble teas. And when I get bubble teas, I almost always get greens and oolongs, like Taiwanese mountain oolongs for bubble teas, which I think makes perfect sense since the original maker of the bubble tea was Taiwan. So that's how I sort of graduated into greens much later on in life and via cold. So I like my green teas cold. Call me crazy. I also, people ask this all the time too, but I don't like sweeten my teas very often, but occasionally when I make this green tea because it's a fruity green tea, I'll put like one of these in when I brew it, like just one little, and it adds this little orangey sour sweet note to it. So I recommend that as an idea if you're want to get creative with your tea to put a little bit of so this is a sweetened dried fruit, so it has a little bit of sugar to it, but not too much. I don't like super sweet drinks. So just a thought as we move into the winter season, I like to put this into chai as well, and also into, like, like cinnamon spiced drinks in the evening that have no caffeine in them. Sweetening them with a little dried fruit is just a fun hack. Uh, I think that is the usual things I need to cover. Oh, this is pear eyewear. So these are the ones that have like the frames you can put on and off. And it is actually Pride in my hometown today. So I can't make it because I have too many things on, but I'm still having a little I'm wearing a little pride flare just in honor of the fact that weirdly we celebrate Pride out of season. Um and these are little book earrings that a fan made for me. One of them is timeless and one of them is soulless. So I just felt like wearing them today. So yeah, so I think we have a couple people tuned in. So Marcus says you're not weird. I don't mind being weird. I think being weird's okay. I don't think it's a pejorative in my world. We're about 5 minutes in, so I think we can just go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody. We're gonna talk about how like the idea for a book actually becomes a book for me. And by that I mean I've talked before about what happens after the rough draft is completed. So I guess this time around I would talk about what it's like before the rough draft is completed, or what it's like climbing up to finishing that rough draft. Um, for me, I tend to have lots of ideas of different characters I could write, different stories I want to write, whether that's within the Parasol verse, which is my bigger universe, or within one of my other universes, or occasionally it's just an idea for a book or even a short story that is completely, like, different, so it's maybe doesn't fit in, or I can't conceive of a way to fit that in. And these are just ideas, they can be sparked by anything. It's really hard to articulate as a creative where you get your ideas from, but it can be sparked from researching some other book, it can be sparked from reading a news article, reading a scientific journal. For me, I find nonfiction really inspiring, so that's often where my like nascent little kernels of ideas come. So yeah, so I get this idea, and then generally speaking, I'll just note it down somewhere because it's usually what we would call high concept. It's usually like a thematic idea. It may not necessarily have anything to do with characters or anything else. And so I just have sort of a running notebook or a Scrivener doc in which I sort of note some of these ideas or concepts. Sometimes I'm just dictating a couple of sentences to my phone, and sometimes it gets never, or and often, frankly, it gets no further than that. So those are the first ideas. And then for me to actually conceive of and start writing a book, I have to have something that I call the character epiphany. Since I'm quite a character driven writer most of the 99.9% of the time, I need to see two characters, one of which is the main character of my book, in conversation with each other. And that because that is really what kind of crystallizes the voice of the characters in my mind. Um, and I literally see them like they're on screen together. So I've talked about this with Solus in particular. The first scene I ever saw in my head of Solus is actually when Alexia and Ivy are walking in the park together at the beginning of, I think it's the beginning of chapter 2. So it's not the first chapter. In fact, this epiphany scene for me is rarely the first scene. It's usually somewhere later on in the book. And Alexia is complaining about having to have accidentally killed a vampire the night before. That was it. That was the first scene in my head. It was Alexia and Ivy. It was Alexia's tone, that sort of practical, pragmatic, deadpan approach, and then it was Ivy's sort of ridiculous, silliness and overreactions to this, and the two of them juxtaposed because the way Alexia reacts to the situation is not normal, but then the way Ivy reacts to the situation is also not normal, and that kind of tickled my funny bone and really kind of got these characters going in my head. So and that was how Alexia, and then, of course, I had to figure out from there, well, why does this proper spinster in British society have the ability to kill a vampire? How do vampires fit into this society? W You know, and and so on and so forth. Like, so in the thought, and if I'm gonna make vampires real, what other monsters might be real and active in British society during the Victorian times? Which exact time period of the Victorian era do I want to sort of set this in, and so on and so forth. And then I will write an outline. Once I have an idea on the characters and setting, then we go to an outline. I'm an outliner. When at the very beginning of my career, when I was writing things like Soulless, those outlines were very strict, like very strict. So would say, like the first incident of the golem has to be on in chapter 3 during the first section of that chapter. The first kiss has to occur right around page 37 or whatever. Like very, very precise. And that was because I'd never written any long form comedy before. I'd never written anything in this style, the sort of comedy of manners style. I'd never written anything that was this explicitly historical in setting. So I wanted to make sure, and I'd never written anything that had a strong romantic arc to it that was going to carry some of the weight of the pacing of the book. And so for all those reasons, I felt like I needed a really meticulous outline. Over the years and 30 books on, I don't write as meticulous of outlines. I probably should, considering how my current book has kind of gotten away from myself, but, but yeah. But in general, my instinct for pacing and tightness and the, like, ingrained natural cadence of the way I write novel length is kind of just part of my writer DNA now. In other words, I don't really need the outline to be so strict. I still like an outline, I still have a general outline and I still know exactly where I want the characters to be. And when I'm writing the Parasol verse, time and space and the appearance of other characters will actually dictate movement and the timing of the entire book now because I have characters that match up at different sort of pivotal events. And so I need to make sure that that character, if they are a side character who is now a main character, I need to make sure that they are in the right space and time for the appearances that I've already written into existence. It gets very cumbersome when you have a lot of characters, let me just say, when you deal with a wide cast of characters. So my outlines are in part utilized for that. In fact, the current book that I'm working on, which is a piece that's a lot like Ambush or Door in that it takes up a lot of space and time and it intersects with various different books during that time frame. I have a timeline that's actually running and acting a little bit like an outline because so I have two and I'm sort of doing it side to side like this because the way it's laid out in Scrivener is I have all of my chapters broken down by scenes which kind of acts as an outline and then there's like a note or as I'll come up with a scene that's in the future I'll write that down and so the whole thing gets written mostly linearly but also non-linearly so I'll have a little like, oh, I can see what the reunion is going to be like. So I'm going to sort of write that down. And that's going to be about chapter 28 or whatever. So we'll pop it in there. And then things will sort of meet up together and end up matching up together. And then on the other side of Scrivener, I have the timeline open. I do a split screen. So there's the screen I'm writing in, and then there's the timeline screen, which is just another document. And the timeline screen is actually what's going on every year and or every decade or what have you and other like pivotal historical events that I might need to utilize as part of the way to move these characters through time and space. So that is kind of how things move along at that juncture. Now, if I'm writing something more like the Divinity series, the Tinkered Star Song series, which is whole cloth conceived, it fits into an existing universe, but not so tightly as something written in the Parasol verse has to. That one will be its own little kind of independent entity, so it doesn't progress in quite the same way. That one also had an outline for all 3 books all at once and because I wrote those 3 books back to back to back. And so, I wrote them all within the same Scrivener document as different projects within that document, which meant that I could keep track of everything, both as single book outlines, but also as a 3-book outline, so that all of the books could tie, between each other and things like that. So each project is a little bit different, each book is a little bit different, but for me, that's the general progression. So we've moved from idea to sort of practical in motion writing the darn thing, and that just takes as long as it takes. So For traditional publishing with my publisher, I was considered quite a fast writer in that I was somebody that could solidly produce at least 1 book a year, which is pretty much the cycle that they had me on, and it's how I like to write. I like to write at least 1 book a year. I usually write 1 book and 1 novella or shorter work or something in a different universe, and then I usually have some sort of special project as well, so I usually produce, like, 3 things, and I'm using the word usually because since, the pandy, shall we say, my, life has gotten a little bit, less predictable, as I think it has for many of us. But it's meant that I can produce in a less predictable manner, because mostly because of family and illness and care, obligations and that sort of thing. So so I'm not as speedy as I once was, which is why there was no new book release this year. Because at the end of last year, I had to take a break from pretty much being a writer in order to look after my father. But that's not what you're here for. You're here for how the idea becomes the novel. So this is the juicy bit of the actual work of writing, and it can take months. Sometimes it can take over months. It depends on the length of the word count, whether the book is running short or long, tight or not. This one that I am working on right now is running both long and loose. Loose means I'm allowing myself to sort of explore and write sections that I think I may end up deleting later. I don't normally do that as a writer. I'm usually a sort of a bare bones writer where I write all the scaffolding of the book together and then I'll go back and fill in the bits that I think need more detail. But sometimes I guess emotionally or creatively, I need some room to breathe and explore, which makes me a little bit more of a experimental writer, and this book seems to require that of me. So it's waffling. Don't worry, I enjoy the editing process, so I'll go back and tighten it up later. But it means it's both looser than normal. It's running a little bit longer than I'm normally quite a brief length writer for a science fiction fantasy author. I tend to stick around 90 to 100,000 words. That's on the shorter end for the genre. 120 is pretty standard. I have gotten that big, but that's pretty rare for me. So this one, I don't know where it's going, but it's long. I'll tell you that much. So the other thing I do during this process for the Parasolvers, at least, and I get this question all the time when I'm asked about sort of research and chronology and keeping track of things and timelines, is I use this. So this is the timetables of history. I will say it's a bit biased towards the Western world. In fact, it's a lot biased towards the Western world. But and I've had this particular version for years, so there may be a more updated one out there. So the timetables of history, and essentially it is a book, and I'll show you. I'll show you like, how about I show you after the Parasol Directorate? So it's laid out kind of like this, where essentially you have these different columns, and so each row is by year, and then each column is sort of a different cultural thing. So here we have like history and politics, literature, visual arts, music, so on and so forth. And then it's sort of major events that occur each year. Um, and here's what I do with it. And I'm gonna flash this up so that you all can't. I should tell you, I should warn you all right now that I'm brutal to books. As an academic, I always used to take notes in my books, and I'm only worse now. I brutalize books all the time. I'm gonna take us to 18 um 70s because that's when here, let's go to the 1850s when the finishing school books occur. How's that? Um don't screen grab or get too close because there'll be some spoilers in here. But this is what this book looks like when I get a hold of it, right? Okay. So what's that is me creating events that are like touchstone events, but in the Parasolverse. And then in the different years that they occur. And I will also have like the births of my different characters logged in the year that they're born, significant achievements in their life, like when they graduate finishing school, etc. And then so I have both the actual historical events that are going on and then the events that are in my books in this one place. So essentially this acts like my timeline. If I need more space to write something down, I'll put like a post-it note in or whatever, but mostly I'm pretty rough with it. I just write it in pen. If I'm not sure and I'm trying to map it out, I'll write it in pencil first. So there's also some pencil notations in here. Often that's like for the ancestors, so to speak. And as I'm struggling to breathe, I wonder if I took my breathing pills today. Oh, that's a whole other thing. Anyway, so that's how I kind of keep track. People always ask me how I keep track of things. It gets very complicated to keep track of. So I have this, which is a sort of like a top-down timeline, which I log events into. And then I have the timeline that's for the book in question, in which the events are logged that are both the things that I think those characters are going to have to encounter that I've already written into existence, also historical events, but also it's like what I would call micro historical events. So like there's a battle at the edge of the British Empire that's very significant in the book I'm currently writing, but it's not considered significant or large enough to have rated presence in this book. So I wrote that into this book in pen because it's a real occurrence, but also I have way more details about it, plus perhaps like links to the battlefield, to the topographic maps of the area, to the vegetative maps of the area. I'll have that stuff all kind of logged as well. So yeah, it gets pretty it's pretty complicated. Um, and then if I need micro detailing about what's going on, particularly the British Empire, if I'm writing that part, then I go to this particular book, which is The Rise and Fall of the British Empire, which has sort of secondary sources, but it also has primaries. I really like primary sources. So this book has primary sources as in like photographs and propaganda, signage, and pictures of the British Army, which show what people look like and what they're wearing, and that sort of thing. So I will also go to this book, and then of course I'll use the internet for research as well. I will pause to research things as I'm writing if I consider it significant enough. If I need to know exactly how and where and what things look like because it's actually present in the book. If it's more like a micro piece of research, and the example I always use is I need a syringe here or an injection or a medical thing of some kind, and then I'll like write a note to myself that's basically, Gail, look up if syringes actually existed in this time period, and if that's the correct word, or if I need to use a different word, etc. So if it's just like a little plot moment like that, I don't bother to stop writing to go look it up. But if I have a bunch of werewolves in a battle, for example, then I will stop and go research the battle because I need to write that battle down in the book. So most of the time I try not to stop too much for research, but like for example, I hit up against a point in the current book that I'm working on where I really needed to know everything that was going on both in that time and place and in the parasol verse in that time of place. And that meant that yesterday I had to take most of the day just to research, like reread my own books and back catalog and scenes with different characters at different times. And also, I spent quite a bit of time reading these two books, just because it was at the point where I was like, I need to know, I need to have everything in my brain about what exactly is going on this particular year, just for characterization and movement in this particular story. So then, but this is the kind of thing that you hit up against when you write like I do in a big sandbox with lots of the same characters and lots of reoccurring like world building. So, rightio, that is how that section goes. And then eventually, when you're me, you hit two bogged down areas as you're writing. At about one third of the way through the book, I get a fatalistic feeling that I'm never going to finish, that I'm a terrible author, that I can't possibly make it, that what am I doing? What have I done with my life? What am I doing with my life? It's an existential crisis. This always happens at one third of the way through the book. Which means it happens at a different point in each book because not every book is the same length, but somehow my subconscious knows that we are at 33%. And it's kind of wild to me because it seems to know it exactly. And then there's no trick. I just have to muscle through it. I just have to keep writing because eventually I will get over the one third slump and then I will get into the middle section and then I'll be like typing away and it'll be fine. And then, of course, because, it never rains, but it pours, as my mother says, at 2/3, I will then hit another slump. There will be another slump, and that will be fun. I will have another crisis. And then I will push my way out of that, and then it's the home stretch. Endings are one of my favorite things to write. I think that is in part because I tend to put all these bricks in place. I tend to have all of these outlines and stuff, so I can have really strong endings. I really like tidy, neat endings. I like happy endings, so I really enjoy writing the ending bits. So once I'm in the home stretch for the last third or so, or the last quarter or so, once I'm out of that slump, then it usually goes pretty smoothly. And then all of a sudden, much to my shock, I'll be done with the book and I'll just be like, oh, it's done. Well, I never knew that was going to happen. Cause I always doubt myself every time. I was like, am I gonna finish this one? I don't know. It's like I haven't written 35, 40 books now. But every single one, I'm like, will we be done? And then we're done. And that's always very exciting. And then I get to write the end, and then I'm very proud of myself. And that is because for me, the rough draft, this bit of the process, the part that I'm currently mired in, is the hardest part for me. The actual writing of the physical book. I know many authors who find that the most comfortable bit. They are, they dictate, or that it for some reason that pouring out of the brain meats is the easiest part. And then they just hate editing. I am the opposite. I find the rough draft portion the hardest bit to write, and then the editing is kind of fun and enjoyable. I really like the rewriting process. That's my favorite bit. But yeah, so that is how I go from an idea to a book. Pushing through. We've been about halfway through the live, and I've told my stories such as they are. So I'll take questions if you guys want questions about that, about the writer brain or the writer process, or anything else you want to ask questions about. And I'm gonna ask you, as usual, to please put a question mark at the beginning of your question so that I know as I scan through the comments that you've had a question. And I'm just gonna quickly scan through in case there were any old guards who ask a question that because they know the system. They've asked it ahead of time. Scanning through. Wait, you can split screen, says Ty. Yes. In Scrivener, you can split screens. You have two documents open at the same time. It's one of the little buttons. Julia has a question. Julia has a question. Um, do I find myself moving around scenes when I'm working in Scrivener? Um, Not often. Most of the time, I pretty much write one scene to the next, but I do often write flip point of view. And sometimes I'll settle pretty firmly into one character's voice and cadence and style. So I'll just write them for a while. And if I'm at a point where the two characters are apart from each other, which they are right now in the book I'm currently working on, it's kind of easier for me because I know where they're going to connect up again. It's kind of easier for me to write one character, especially if I'm like really in them. I'm really sort of like feeling their emotions and their voice and all of that sort of thing, especially if they're very different from each other, the two characters. So I did this with like Reticence, for example. So I'll write one character scene for several chapters or even longer. So I'll write their point of view. So I'm basically writing kind of like half the book linearly, and then I'll go back and write the other characters' other side of that equation. And sometimes it's because I know what's going on better in character A than character B. And I'm also like already in it with character A, so I'll just keep going with them for a while until I really need to know what happened to character B, and then I'll pause, kind of recoup, and go back to character B. So that's one way when I'm doing flipped point of views. Then the other thing is, like I said, I'll have like these little epiphanies of future scenes. And sometimes there's scenes that never happen. They like actually will never actually occur in the book, but I'll need to write them down just like emotionally. And usually I know just heartbeat wise, like it's a reunion scene or it's a sex scene or it's a confession scene or something like that. So I kind of know about where they're gonna fall in the book. So I'll jump ahead and write those scenes when they happen in the creative brain. So I used to be pretty strictly a linear writer, but these days I just let myself jump around. I will say there was a part of me that was always a little bit like that, and it's just that, Scrivener makes that style of writing way easier. It's one of the reasons I'm such a devotee of the particular tool is, because I moved from Word to Scrivener, and I was like, "Oh, I am never going back, ever. I don't like having to, like, scroll ahead to my notes. I just my brain just works in the way Scrivener lays out information. It's just it very much works for the way I visualize books, the way I visualize writing. Yeah, I'm a pretty, like, visual author in that I don't know how else to put it except that, like, even the shapes of the words on the page is very kind of important to me and is a way I kind of remember where I am in the book. I don't know how else to put it except that that way of, like, seeing the way the chapters and the scenes are broken out and then seeing the timeline. And then in my case, I'll also put images and additional notes for each scene in. So like the dress a character is wearing, or a dress that informs the dress that a character is wearing, or my own sketches, or like the appearance of the wolf form of a character. Those sorts of things are all easily integrated into Scrivener, so I can see visual components. And I just am a very visual writer, so I find that very helpful. So I hope that answered your question. Do I move scenes around in Scrivener? Sometimes. Um, I mean, that is really a matter of pacing. So, I try to have flipped point of view scenes, like one character and then the other character in every single chapter. I also try to make sure you go back and forth between the 2 characters, but the timing has to work out. And I don't wanna have to pad out, so I don't wanna have to write a scene for a character that isn't important to the movement of the story, the pacing of the story. So sometimes I have to shuffle the scenes around just for pacing reasons, for brevity reasons, because chapters I only want chapters to be a certain length. I don't want them to be too long. So there's a lot of jury rigging in that regard. Um yes, there's a question about why using Scrivener instead of Word, and for me, I think I answered that, which is it just works with the way my creative brain works so much better than Word. Also, when I was writing on Word back in the day, if you wrote over a certain word count, something wild like 30,000 words, the program would crash constantly, and I was just and Word, if you don't know, again, I don't know if they've instituted this, but it didn't autosave either. So you would like if it crashed and you hadn't been like nervous tick saying, which I have to say I've developed that habit from my days as a word writer where I would just save things constantly because it would crash on me all the time and then I'd lose whatever I'd just written. So it just became it was just too frustrating of a program for me to use. And so I jump shipped from Word to like OpenOffice and then to I guess it's called Libre. And then that's kind of ODT is still kind of what I work in if I have to work in a text document. I prefer an RTF. Ooh, we're getting technical all of a sudden. I prefer working in RTF if I'm just taking notes or something that like isn't writing a book. But yeah, I use Scrivener because it was made for me, I think. I think I'm very special. All right, moving along. I'm in the YouTube questions at the moment. I'll get to the Facebook questions in just a second. Yes, existential crises are terrible. Yes. All right. We have a question. Do I know of any middle grade agents accepting books? No, I'm sorry. I don't know any children. So middle for those of you who don't know, there's middle grade is the step below, that's not wrong, but the young just younger than young adult. I have only written young adult and adult. Those are the only 2 categories of age demographics that I've written for. I've never written for anything younger than that. And generally speaking, middle grade runs to a different set of agents who represent children's books. Children's books are a different world, it's a different dynamic. Young adult transfers in, but there are agents who represent both adult and young adult. There are not a lot of agents who represent both children's, which would include middle grade and adult. So if you are working on something that is in the children's book arena or is middle grade, I have had little to no contact with that world at all. So I can't help you. And that would be if I could even help you with the agent world, which I don't keep track of because I and my agent have been together for almost 20 years now. So I've never really needed to know what's going on in the agent world because I haven't needed to search for one in a really long time. Thank goodness. I'm really relieved about that, but it means I'm not a useful person to ask those kinds of questions too. All right. Do I ever get surprised by a character as I'm writing their perspective? What an interesting question. I usually know my characters really well. I love to describe part of characterization this way. I think when you're writing characters, every character has a void, a thing that they are lacking, a missing part of them. When you're writing like a soulmates or a fated mates romance novel, then the missing part is the other person, right? But the void is something that in some cases the character is aware of, and in some cases they're not aware of. So it's interesting to think about your characters from that perspective. What is the void? And also, do they know what that void is? Um, and do they know that they have it or not? So those are things to think about when characterizing. And then when they're out on their search for whatever it is that fills the void, do they know what they're searching for? And the key is most of the time, even if the character does know what they're searching for, they should be searching for the wrong thing or they shouldn't know it accurately. And for me, it's like the character um, thinks they know what they want, but it's the narrative's responsibility to give them what they actually need because what they want and what they need don't necessarily match up. In some cases, they do. For example, Dimity's book, Defy or Defend. Dimity knows what she wants. She's just kind of known what she wanted. She didn't know what form it would take, or what exactly why she wanted it, what the need was underneath that. But she knows what she wants. So I had to give it to her in that particular instance. But most of the time, my characters think they want one thing when actually they want something else, right? That's what's fun to read. Unless you really like a pining character, which I also do. So occasionally my characters know what they want, and I'm thinking about Pillover and Embouchure Door. They know what they want, and they just have to wait a really long time. Suffer little characters. Um, so that's characterization. So if I have a handle on all of those things, then rarely does the character surprise me. That said, occasionally one of them will. Occasionally, some of my more mysterious characters will, or my more sort of capricious characters will shock me. So the trickster characters like Miss It, I'm always like, ooh, why'd you do that? Lord Akaldama, never sure what he's up to. Never convinced. But he's gonna like sweep in and say something, and I'm gonna be like, all right, I accept your decision in this scene, Mr. Vampire. Um, so yeah, so sometimes the characters do surprise me, yeah. But I usually let them. I think when characters surprise you with what they say or what they do on the page as you're writing, it's probably some subconscious part of the muse or the writer brain. And I usually at this juncture, I trust that part of the writer brain. That it usually knows what it's about, even if I don't like front part of the brain completely understand why. I'm putting that dialogue on the page from that character's mouth. I'm putting that character in that scene. I don't always understand why some instinct in me is calling for this, but it's usually the right instinct. I've learned to trust that instinct, especially where Lord Oklahoma and the trickster characters in my universes are concerned. We have a question about whether I'm planning more YA books like The Finishing School. Not at the moment. It is the publishing house that I'm most likely to work with again if I do traditional publishing. My editor is still at that house. I still have a really good relationship with them. I like them very much. I have thought about it. I need to have something that's really commercially viable for them that I want to write. And some of the trends in YA, I don't really jive with right now. So I have been pinged a couple of times to write various things, like what are they called? Romanticities, like a dark romance or something like that. And it just I haven't had a great epiphany for a book that would work for that. So I just haven't done it yet. Um, River asks when or where is the craziest moment you got inspiration for a book? It's usually when I'm hanging out with my friends in a big group and they're drunk. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Um, but my friends can be incredibly hilarious, and, on more than one occasion, I've bid in for something at a party where everybody's in uproars, and I was like, can I put that in a book?" I mean, I completely steal that for a book. So yeah, I get in real life inspiration is often just my friends because my friends are funny and fun to hang out with. Um, what is the book you've had to developmentally edit the most? Oh, that one's an easy answer. It's Blameless, Blameless, and then Prudence. Those are the two books that I had to do the most rewrites on, in general, and at the developmental edit stage. Um, yeah, those were heavy. Those were heavy passes. Um, and then there's a couple of books that have not been published. Sorry, that was weird. I have a couple of books that are unpublished, partly because they require such a big developmental edit. So I basically wrote the book, and then I agree. So I sent it off to a developmental editor, and my dev editor was like, "Oof," and I was like, "Oh, you're right," and I don't want to do that, and so I just didn't. And so there's a couple of books that are asleep. I know I have whole entirely written books out there in the world that you guys don't get to read because I can't bear the idea of the heaviness of that edit pass. And it may happen someday, but I also need to be confident that the end result of those books is something that you would enjoy reading. And even with a heavy dev edit pass, I'm not sure on those particular books. So that's why they're sort of sitting unfinished out in the world, or finished but unedited. But yeah, the two that I had the biggest developmental edits are Blameless and Prudence. Um, somebody asked what year Lord Akaldama says he was born in, and you can't ask me a question like that. I don't know how many books ago that was. That information was dropped, but it was many, many books ago. So someone can look that up. Somebody knows who he really is, and they can tell you when he was born. Um, I'm asked how I come up with my very strange names. They sound British, but not run of the mill. Ah, that's intentional. So I like to put for characters that are in the Parasol verse that are born in or around the European areas. Not all of them are. I like to give them names that have meaning that pertain to their shifted form, if if possible, or to their previous careers. But I also like to give them very Victorian or older sounding names. So I use a lot of records of gravestones, like old gravestones. Those are useful. So take Sophronia as a really good example. That actually is a Victorian name. It's tied to Sophia, as we would say it now. But it wasn't very common even in the Victorian era. But I chose it because of that, because it sounds almost like a name you might be familiar with, but it's still just off kilter enough to be different and unique, but also makes it seem older. A name like Sophronia feels older, and it feels old world to a modern reader. And that's really intentional. I pick a lot of my names that way. I also try to pick a lot of names. I've said this before, but I like to pick names that have different first letters. So when you're looking at the capital letters on the page, there aren't too many of the same large capital letter. So, Sophronia, Dimity, Agatha, right? They all have different first names, and then Sidheg. Of course, Sidheg had already existed, so I was already married to that name. But so I like to pick the names so that they're dissimilar in visual appearance, and that's because I'm just a little bit dyslexic, and I have a little bit of capital letters in particular. I'll flip them in my head a lot. So I just and again, like I said before, I'm really visual. So when I look at the page, I want the larger letters on the page when I'm talking about the different characters to be different from each other, so that it's harder to confuse characters with each other. Yeah, so that's another way when I'm coming up with names. Uh, my strange names. Child vampires or werewolves? Nope, there are not. It's explained in one of the books that it's not possible. Now that I think about it, it might be explained in the SAS series. There is in that series because everything changes, of course, after supersaturation. But and it's yeah, but in general, there is like a genetic reason why if you have not you know, become an adult, you can't genetically, you can't survive the bite. So it would do no good to try. All right, I'm gonna pause on YouTube, so no more questions on YouTube. Ooh, let's not spill our drink. And let's see what the Facebook questions are. Oh God, Facebook's always a bit harder because my eyes are so bad. All right, let's see. So, when I write loosely and end up with waffle, do you have a cutting room floor type document where all of your yes, I do. Yeah, I'm not an overwriter in that I have like huge scenes, but a really good example is the deleted scene from the Demigod 12 from the middle book of the Tinkered Star Song series. I originally wrote a sex scene for those characters, and then I decided that it didn't suit the tenor of those books. Those books are a little bit more closed door. They're just a little bit more young adult. They aren't entirely young adult. I would call them sort of new adult, kind of college age, but it didn't feel like the right thing. I don't know how else to put it. Instinctively, I was like, I don't really want a sex scene in this book, but I had written it. So I just cut it out and then I offered it. And it's still out there if you would like to read it. If you are a member of the newsletter, you have access to that sex scene that I wrote for them. And I also integrated into one version of the book, so you can actually get the book with the sex scene in it. But it's not a huge thing, you know, it's just a scene. And that's often the kind of stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor. It's stuff that does not move the story along, that just is adding to the world. So occasionally I will pull it out and it will become a deleted scene that I'll just put up on my blog. Sometimes if it's with a side character, it could be useful in a future book that also has that character. So I'll keep those guys, as you say, on the cutting room floor. Just in case. I mean, I wrote it. I might as well see if I can use it, right? Lavender asks, do I have different genres and subgenres that have different release pacings? For example, once a year versus nope. No, I used to do one when I was with traditional publishing, as my mainstay, I used to do one parasol verse book a year, basically. That was how it worked out for me with like these guys with with the Parasol Protectorate, finishing school, and then the Custard Protocol. Those pretty much kind of worked out to one a year in the end. I think I had two come out in one year once or twice. That's because I don't dictate the publishing schedule. And generally speaking, my releases are spring and fall. That's just the kind of author I am. I don't really write, I guess, what you would call beach reads or sort of chick lit or that kind of book. So they rarely bring me out in at the beginning of the summer. So I'm not usually a summer release. Again, this is back in the day. I mean, we're getting up to 5 or 6 years since I've had a 6 years since I've had a traditional book come out. So things are different now. But yeah, the rest of the stuff, it's sort of, when I have something in the works, I have something in the works and I publish it or I move it through the process of publication, which basically is mostly dictated by my contract workers. How long does it take me to get the dev editor and then get those back and then run those edits? And then I have to get the copy editor and then my beta readers need to do it and then it has to be formatted. So, just takes time. Um, so yeah, I don't have a different pacing. If you're asking in general whether they do, the different genres don't. No, not in my experience. Anyway, there are some genres, subgenres in the romance and in like a lit RPG and stuff like that that rapidity is expected, so you should be writing extremely quickly. So there are genres of publishing where there's an expectation that the author write much faster than I write, but I don't write those genres, and that's one of the reasons. Um, where am I with the new Parasol book? Says Robin. Well, you have to be on the Chirrup to get the details of that. But the answer is, if you're asking about the slump, it feels like I'm at 2/3 at the moment. I'm feeling very much like it is a slog right now, but that I might see the light at the end of the tunnel. But yeah. Uh, this is the current life situation is simply that, part of this book not having a regular cycle, this one I'm currently working on, is that it keeps getting derailed by highly inconvenient things like illness and death. So there's like the book just goes, "Bleh, and I am one of those writers who, when I start to write a project, I want to see it through to the end. Like that is the thing I want to be working on. I want to be working on it pretty much every day of the week, the work week, and I want to go in and I want to lay down the words until I finish the darn thing. And if I get derailed by anything, travel, flood, famine, death, illness, whatever it is, it really monkeys with my pacing. And I would love to be more resilient than that. I would love to be a writer with better calluses. I would love to be one of those writers who can write everywhere, anywhere, at any time, but I just am not. And so what happens is if I get thrown out of the book for a long enough time, so if like this suddenly I'm a week in, New York or something, then it takes me much longer to start up writing again each time my flow is interrupted. And if it's so like because I just have to go back and reread more and more to get back into it. I think I just my brain's not so good, you guys. It's not what it once was. I cannot retain what is now 70, 80,000 words of what I just wrote. It goes out of me. I talk this a lot because people will ask me questions about previous books, and I was like, I wrote it down for a reason, so I didn't have to store it up here anymore. Like I write it to get it out of my system, and then it's just not there. I don't have access to it. It's on the page. That's the point of the page, is that it be on it. So what happens is I have to reread quite a bit. And if I've written 70,000 words, that's a lot of rereading every time I come back to the book because I have completely forgot what I was working on a week or 2 weeks ago. So so yeah, so every delay is sort of 2 or 3 times what you think it is in terms of my writing flow. So a delay of a week is really a delay of 2 weeks while I get back into it, and a delay of 2 weeks is really a delay of a month, and it just compounds on itself. When life hits you broadside, as I'm sure you all are aware of and have similar situations that you can relate to. But yeah, it just means that this book is taking way longer than any other book pretty much ever has. Because life. Um, so that the answer with the new book is it seems to be at the 2/3 point, but it's hard to tell because I keep getting stopped while I'm in the middle of it. Don't worry, like pacing and flow all get smoothed out in the editorial process. So I feel like it's really hard for you guys, the end result, the readers, to ever understand which bits of the book were the hard bits. At least I hope you can't. Hope that doesn't translate. This is an interesting. Rachel asks if a timeline or an outline has ever been completely borked by something, a dialogue, a scene, an event, an occurrence, and the answer to that is yes. And it's extremely annoying when that happens because then I'll have to revert back and rewrite. Usually, what happens is if the timeline gets borked, I change the character. So the character's age has to change. The character has to have lied about something. This is where it's great when you work with spy characters because they lie all the time. So that means I can have lied to you in the past. I just did it in Sophronia's voice, right? So if something gets borked like that, yeah, it's usually that the character has to suffer the consequences of the timeline reset. Hee. Uh, yeah, but it does happen. I'm trying to think. I think I had an example recently that I could share with you, but I will say Alessandro is a very useful character because he exists in a time out of time. He's older than a lot of the other characters I'm working with, so I can have him do something in the way past or in the sort of way past. The vampire character is also very useful, also prone to lying. So, those two, I can get away with a lot. Um, oh, Fortunately, I finished my tea, or I would have just lost another computer. Good times. Um, Watch Gail be chaotic. It's the usual live situation. Anyway, I spilled my tea. The glass did not break, and nothing spilled except for uh, excuse me a second while I catch an ice cube. I don't know where the other ice cubes went, but hey ho. All right. Good times. uh I hope that answered that question. Whatever witty thing I was going to come up with as an example is entirely gone, so I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna proceed further with the timeline being borked. But yes, it does happen quite a bit, and rewriting has occurred, which is why some of the like background history is written in pencil when it's written in this book because I might need to change it. And I actually intentionally use the pencil to write stuff in the book that I think might be fungible or malleable just in case I need to change it in the future. And honestly, it's not like you guys have the capacity to keep track of all of this, or if it like, or even if any of you are attempting to do so. But I'm just paranoid enough to be scared that you'll catch me out if I say the wrong date for some character or another. So, um, yeah, innate paranoia is what's going on. Somebody says that Sophronia is a real family name in their family. It looks like oh, hey, Sally. It looks like I don't have any more questions on Facebook. So I'll go back to YouTube, see if anybody has any last questions before we close it out. We're running the clock at this juncture, so do do do. Do do do. Somebody has child vampires and werewolves. Okay, so someone has a question about supersaturation, and the answer to that is supersaturation is a super secret occurrence that is referred to in retrospect in the books that are the future of the Parasolvers, which are not the future of the Parasolvers, because of course there's no connection whatsoever. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, contract, contract, yada yada yada. Which is the San Andreas Shifter series. So something happens, and that something is supersaturation. And some of the Parasolvers characters are involved in supersaturation, and some of the San Andreas Shifters may or may not have been involved in supersaturation. But there's a thing, and it occurs, and I know everything about it, but you may or may not. Though some of you might put all the clues together at this juncture. And it has to do with World War I as it occurs in my universe. But as I have said openly, I would never write anything post turn of the century because I'm not interested in writing anything that has to do with World War I or World War II. I find them very upsetting, and I also find people a little too obsessed with that. So I feel like people would start coming for me, gunning for me actually, because guns are involved. I don't like guns very much. So anyway, I don't know where that came from. Why are we talking about this? Oh, yeah. So supersaturation is never likely to appear in print as such, detailed, because it occurs during a time period that I personally refuse to write. She sticks her nose up in the air. So that's supersaturation. The answer is sort of a thing that happens in my universe. There's a writer's block question. Beatrice, you can simply look up Gail Carriger writer's block because I have a whole blog post about it where I talk about what I do with writer's block and deadlines. And in part, the answer to your question is inherent in the question, which is I find deadlines help me with writer's block because if I have to finish the thing, I have to finish the thing. Um, Eddie asks, "Oh, will we get more San Andreas books?" The answer is I feel like it's closed out for now with the 4, but I didn't like shut down the universe. There's always the options for more. Absolutely. I certainly left it open. There are certainly more characters who I could write about, but at the moment, I feel like I'm more obligated, for lack of a better way of putting it, to write first books for you because you guys have been patient and waiting for new books in that universe for a long time. And also, I owe you a couple of sci-fis. So that's right now kind of more what's on my radar in terms of what I feel like I should be writing. Um, um, Kim, I'm this is the problem with YouTube is you guys have different handles on YouTube, and I'm like, I don't know what that handle has on it, but I'm gonna say Kim asked if we can appearance in the new book from Reinhard, which is a very interesting question you've just asked there, my sweet little bean. Yeah, you're gonna get it. For those of you who have like stuck it through to the end of the live and are not on the Chirrup, my newsletter, this book I'm writing is Reinhard's book. I've been pretty like I've dropped a lot of clues about it. There it is. Yes, you're getting an appearance from him. He's the main character or one of the main characters. Yeah, you're gonna finally get so for those again, for those who like may know the name but cannot remember who this is, Reinhardt is the werewolf spy character with the different colored eyes. He wears an eye patch in the manga, and yeah, and he has a wolf form with two different colored eyes, and he is a human with two different colored eyes. And this is his whole backstory. And my goodness, is it a doozy. I hope you guys enjoy it. It starts with the Napoleonic Wars. So good times. Yeah, there was a reason I had to do a lot of research for this book. Is the new Parasol verse book queer? No, but as per usual, I mean the main romance is not, but as per usual with me, there are a lot of queer characters, including probably the best dads I've ever written. There's a pair of dads in this book, and they are great. I love them so much. They're charming and delightful and loving and adorable and obsessed with throw pillows, which um, you know, as am I. So, um, oh, Ty has a Be There About It about the orca scientists, the orca scientists in the San Andreas book. Yeah, I would love to do some more sapphic stuff in the San Andreas series. I think that would be a cool kind of angle or line or spin-off or something. But yeah, like I said at the beginning of this, I'm never short of ideas. I always have so many ideas of things I could write. It's not one of my problems. It's finding the time to write all of the ideas and then actually writing them down. um there's a nice thank you for willing to answer questions. I'm delighted. I'm always pleased to answer questions. I'm always pleased that you guys are interested in my wild and crazy worlds. And yeah. Yes. I'm so glad you guys were excited by the dads. They're so cute. I love them so much. Um, and with that, with gay dads and my heart story in your future, um I am gonna call it. I think we're at for Robin has asked where we are with the new Parasol Verse book. I've answered that question. So I think I have answered all the questions from everybody, and it was a delight to spend tea time with you all. And I don't know if we have a live next month, but I'll figure it out for you. If we do, November will be the last live for a while, and then because I then go to Thailand, and then I'll have to figure out how to do a live from Thailand, which is sort of exactly on the wrong time zone. So I might do a few lives from Thailand, but they're likely to be a little bit different timing wise. But I'll let you know in the Chirrup and of course on online if that's where you follow me. But the Chirrup is always best. And I hope you all are having wonderful falls. And I look forward to talking to you all in whatever sphere. Look after yourselves, and as ever, if you can, somebody else too. Bye.